You're watching Business Tonight. The music television, or MTV, has a large and faithful young audience in the U.S. Now the network is determined to go global, investing heavily in MTV Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Bill Roedy, president of MTV International, says the key to international expansion is localized programming. He joins us now live from our studio in central Hong Kong. Welcome to our show, Mr. Roedy.
Thank you, Lori.
Tell me, Mr. Roedy, the U.S. formula was so successful. Why, then, does the company feel that it's so essential to go local?
Well, actually, it's not a new strategy. It's been around since we first went to the international environment back in 1987, which is designed a complete operation reflective of the audience. What we just announced recently, however, is a much greater expansion. It's a major, major investment, really on three levels. First and foremost, programming to get closer to the audience. And then secondly, we're investing quite a bit in infrastructure. We're opening up new offices around the world and also expanding some of the current offices. And then finally, the technology component, we're digitizing our single in quite a few places and then compressing that single in order to give us much more capacity so we can have even more channels.
You mentioned getting closer to the audience with your programming. Can you give us a clue into your key to doing that?
Yeah. Again, we've been local since day one. We started in Europe in August of 1987. There we started with a pan-regional channel based in London. We had offices throughout Europe, but the headquarters was in London. And now we're looking at three separate versions of that. One is a northern, secondly a central, and then a southern. Southern's in Milan. Central will be based in Hamburg, and the northern will continue to be based in London. In Latin America, where we're headquartered in Miami, we're doing a northern now out of Mexico City, excuse me, and a southern out of Buenos Aires. And then in Asia, where we've been headquartered in Singapore now for a year, we're putting a much greater emphasis in Taipei for MTV Mandarin, where we'll also have a production base and based out of Taipei. And then for MTV India, we're increasingly basing the operation in Bombay.
What kind of challenges have you found unique to Asia, anything political or cultural?
Well, surprisingly not as much as you might expect, because our whole strategy, of course, is to reflect the audience. And when we enter into a region, it's very important to not only be sensitive to all the constituencies, and most importantly, the audience, that's our biggest and most important constituency, but also to respect the region in all different ways. So the MTV you see in Asia is much different than the MTV that you'd see in the United States or even Europe. It's very much reflective of the audience.
What do you think about your competitors? Do you think that they're focused in more to the local audience here?
Well, it's somewhat flattering, actually. In the last couple of years, there's been a plethora of music channels really around the world. I think at last count there's almost 100. It's flattering because the good news for us is that they tend to be somewhat imitative of MTV. We pioneered the formula back in '81, and as we've evolved that formula, the music channels that have launched tend to somewhat copy us. So, and often they fill a niche. They fill a niche that we don't fill. What MTV does that the other music channels don't do is that we provide the international, global perspective to the audience. First and foremost, we target localized programming, but very much also very important is we give the audience a glimpse to the bigger international picture where we take elements from all the MTVs around the world and share.
Okay, thank you very much for giving us some insight into the expansion plans for MTV. I've been speaking with Bill Roedy. He is president of MTV International.